On air, online, on point.
Slave times when they were
Confidence of the American people.
The state of
Why
Washington
the habit?
District Attorney wanted to get rid of it.
Welcome to On Point. Today, we will discuss Senate Bill 48, also known as the Fair Education Act. The bill mandates that instruction in social sciences must include a study of the role and contributions of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender Americans, and other ethnic and cultural groups to the development of California and the United States. State Senator Mark Leno authored SB 48 and introduced the bill to California legislators on December 13, 2010. The state Senate passed the bill on April 14, 2011 by a vote of 23 to 14. The Assembly passed the bill on July 6 by a vote of 49 to 25. Governor Jerry Brown then signed the bill into law on July 14th. The law went into effect on January 1, 2012, but it's up to each school district to determine when to implement the new material. Now to On Point's Mark Schuermann.
Thanks, Taylor. Today we'll be talking with Dr. Greg Knotts, Associate Professor and Graduate Advisor in the Elementary Education Department at Cal State Northridge, and Beatriz Cholo, Communications Manager for the Courage Campaign. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
I'd like to start talking to you, Dr. Knotts. I want to learn a little bit about the background of the bill. What were the bills that led up to SB 48?
So SB 48 probably has a little over 10-year explicit history. It started in about 2000 with AB 537, which is the Student Safety and Violence Prevention Act.
Okay.
That's the first time we hear words like sexual orientation and gender identity added to the Equity in Education Act. That bill was about harassment. It was interesting because at that bill in 2000 it said specifically that the omission of curriculum did not violate the spirit of the law. So it actually pulled out the notion that we want to protect kids from harassment, but we don't need to teach about it. About 5 years later, AB 606 comes along, and that's called the Safe Place to Learn Act. That put in place things like safety plans, and it also added a little bit of teeth to the preceding law. It said we should probably implement this law that happened 5 years ago. Not much is going on with it. And that brings us to the current day, SB 48, which says we ought to be teaching about all Americans in our K-12 history books. So the notion of SB 48 is adding conversations explicitly to the curriculum about all persons, all walks of life in American history.
Okay, so adding the mention of people of all walks of life in history, and specifically adding to African Americans, Mexican Americans, all those ethnic and cultural backgrounds, and then also those with different sexual orientation than just straight. So how do the words of SB 48 actually change the curriculum? Like, what is going to change about what's being taught in the classrooms?
So SB 48 says that we should add the contributions from all backgrounds of different Americans. It specifically adds an interesting group of people: Pacific Islanders, the LGBT community, and then this innocuous other ethnic and cultural groups. As you said, there were already kind of explicit links, explicit statements in the Equity for Education Act about Mexican Americans, African Americans, Asian Americans. So all this law is saying is that we ought to make sure that we're inclusive, right? The law is called Fair, Accountable, Inclusive, and Respectful. So the law is saying Fair Education Act, right? So we ought to be including the contributions of all Americans. So I don't think anybody knows how this is going to change the curriculum, to be quite frank. Laws sometimes walk before reality. Sometimes reality happens before the laws, but I think in this case the law is happening first, and it's suggesting that we need to move forward and be more articulate about the contributions of all persons, and it specifically pulls out some groups that had not been articulated before.
Okay. And then, do you know if teachers will be prepared for this bill? Are they going to receive any special training to learn how to implement the new material, new textbooks, new
The law doesn't require training. The law doesn't require textbooks. The law doesn't require anything. The law says we should do this. As with many, many unfunded mandates in education, people with very, very good intentions put goals before practicality. So I don't know that teachers will be prepared, at least in the short term. I think in the long term, as with anything, I don't think people in 1966 were doing a great job teaching about African American contributions to the U.S. And so I imagine that with time, we'll be a little bit more intelligent, we'll be a little bit more planful, we'll be a little bit more thoughtful about the curriculum we actually want to create and implement with our kids.
Okay. And then finally, do you know what kind of effect SB 48 will have on the state budget or on the budget of individual school districts?
Well, it'd be easy for me to say a zero effect because it's an unfunded mandate. So it says, the law says we need to do this, we need to add these contributions of all these persons, but it doesn't say write new textbooks, it doesn't say buy packaged curriculum, it doesn't say go to museums, it doesn't say to do anything. So I think it would be a zero effect in a literal way. Obviously curriculum needs to be written, obviously textbooks, as is true of a general cycle, will be rewritten over time. But in the short term, I don't think it'll be a zero effect because it's an unfunded mandate. It just says we need to do this, but it doesn't provide money, so first of all, and it doesn't require money, second of all. So
whose responsibility is it to implement this bill? Is it the individual school districts, or is it the state as a whole to tell school districts what to do?
Well, both. On any level, there's local management, and then there's district management, and then there's state management, right, at any school district. So the problem with this bill, much like the preceding bills before it doesn't build in an accountability system. So again, it's a really well-intended idea that has no teeth. So I think that sometimes there's a lot of hullabaloo over nothing until we figure out what we're going to do in terms of implementing this kind of curriculum with our kids.
All right, thank you, Dr. Knotts. Now that we know a little bit about the bill, let's hear some from people who oppose and support the bill. Let's see what they have to say. I talked with Ben Lopez from the Traditional Values Coalition, which is an organization who defines themselves as America's largest non-denominational Bible-based lobby group. Here's what Mr. Lopez had to say about the bill. What are your feelings about SB 48?
Well, we opposed the bill when it was first introduced in December of 2010, and as it made its way through the legislature, obviously, and then on the governor's desk, and of course it being signed into law, and then when we tried to pull a referendum against the bill from enacting it, we've been opposed to the bill from the get-go for a whole myriad of reasons. One of which is we don't think that at a time when California is ranked 49th of 50 states in a lot of the educational levels with respect to science, math, English proficiency, writing, why we should be injecting controversial studies on people or a community simply based on their sexuality. You know, the LA Times actually in April of 2011 came out against this bill for a very legitimate and good reason, and that was at a time when California's instruction time in the classroom is minimal because of cutbacks, and at a time when teachers are forced to teach to the test for the standard exam so their students can excel and get passed on to the next grade, when you inject a whole other issue to be mandated that teachers teach, something else has to be minimally taught. So what is going to be sacrificed to accommodate the new teaching that SB 48 is going to require? And is there a large demand for this bill? Is there a groundswell coming from parents throughout school districts up and down the state? Is there a groundswell coming from school board members in the state saying they want this bill? There was none. So for those reasons and a whole myriad of other reasons, I mean, we've opposed the bill from the get-go.
Now let's hear somebody who is for the implementation of SB 48. Beatriz Cholo is from the Courage Campaign, a leading advocacy organization pushing for progressive and full equality throughout the nation. Ms. Cholo, why do you support the bill?
Well, obviously I support the bill because I think including the contributions of all Americans is important. I disagree with Mr. Lopez. I don't think it's controversial to include lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender contributions, important contributions that were made throughout history in history lessons around the state. This is the first state to implement such a law, and we're proud of it. And we fought very hard to keep it, and we're going to continue fighting that because there are several groups out there that are trying to get the law repealed, and we're going to fight against that because we feel this is important. This, Mr. Lopez, I'm sure, would never argue against including Mexican Americans in our history books, or women, or Native Americans. So why would this be controversial? I don't see the controversy.
So since the bill mentions in the same category teaching about lesbian, gay, bisexual, transsexual in the same breath that it mentions African Americans, Mexican Americans, why do you see it as important to teach about somebody's sexual orientation in the same way you would teach about, say, Martin Luther King Jr. being African American?
This law is not about sex or sex education. Clearly, it's about contributions that have been made by individuals that happen to be lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender. There are so many interesting things out there that I think kids would benefit from knowing. For instance, gays and lesbians were prosecuted for being gay and lesbian. President Eisenhower, one of his first acts when he came into office was to ban all gays and lesbians from serving in the public sector, and also banning them from working for government contractors. There are lots of things out there that kids would benefit from knowing, and I don't think it's harmful. It wouldn't make you gay. And our opponents argue that we would be teaching 5-year-olds to be gay, and that is frankly ludicrous.
All right, thank you. Now that we've heard a little bit from those who support and oppose the bill, let's see what parents are saying. On Point reporter Melissa Simon asked parents what they thought about teaching gay history to kids as young as elementary school age.
I think it would be fine as long as it, the subject, whatever it was or whoever they were teaching, was historically significant.
Teaching it in elementary school, I think the kids are very young.
You know, elementary, maybe a little too young, maybe junior high, high school. Elementary, I think they're still a little too young to understand. I have kids in junior high school, and they understand it. I think they can comprehend a little bit better.
The history should probably first be taught at home, and students should be taught tolerance, and if it is a way for children to be taught tolerance, then I would agree with it.
I'm thinking the parents should actually let them know what's going on before the school does.
Kids know about it at the age of 5, so I don't feel like there's an age that's too young. You know, if it's visible out there, then kids should probably know about it.
They need to learn about everything. So that's part of history. It's part of something that needs to be explained to them.
I just don't feel that it's the right time because children will not understand it. Talk about something else. Let them be children.
People's right to know who did what, and if you really need to know their sexual orientation, that's fine with me.
Ms. Cholo, I want to ask you first, what is your reaction to that? Or have you talked with parents and have they had similar responses?
Well, all of the curriculum would be age appropriate. We, again, like I mentioned earlier, this is not a sex education class, and I think that the decisions that would be made based on it would be based on parental and teacher input at the local level, and so it's not a matter of teaching kids inappropriate material in school. It would all be based on parental input and teacher input, and it's not true that 5-year-olds would be taught some of this history because 5-year-olds are not being taught this type of curriculum. So it would be done in an age-appropriate way.
And you, Dr. Knotts, have you spoken to parents about this at the elementary school level?
I've not spoken to parents, but I'd like to think if my parents had been interviewed when I was in elementary school about the contributions of persons of color, that they might have responded in ways that would say, I think it's important for my kid to learn about people outside of my own race, for instance. In that regard, I think there's a tacit supposition that all those parents might be straight. And so it's interesting that you didn't ask any gay parents and to see what they might have contributed to that response. I think this bill is about teaching people about contributions of all walks of life. And so it's about the contributions that shape American history. And probably beyond even American history. It doesn't say American history. It says that this is to life that's in contributions. And so this is about learning about all kinds of persons who have contributed. So I hope that that parents see that they understand that educators would do this in age and developmentally appropriate ways. No one's asking, the bill doesn't ask for the standards to be changed. So I trust that parents have a sense that educators know what would be the best way to implement the spirit of this law.
Turning a 20-foot wall into a canvas takes vision. So will getting into college. I've got what it takes. So do you.
Up to 40% of businesses never recover after experiencing a major disaster. Make a plan at ready.gov/business.
Something that has been brought up in connection with SB 48 is the issue of bullying. Some of those who support the bill say that the more kids know about the contributions of LGBT people, the less kids that are openly gay will be harassed and bullied. Ms. Cholo, do you have an opinion about this bullying issue?
I actually think that it's good for kids to see familiar faces or faces that they may feel a connection to. When I was in high school many years ago, it felt like history was just about white men, and it was boring to me. And it wasn't until I went to college and I studied and majored in history that I learned that there were women and Latinos who made wonderful contributions in history. And I think that made me feel a little bit more connected. And I would say, and I would assume that most LGBT youth who, as we all know, are having tough issues in school, I think it would be gratifying for them to see these kinds of contributions and talk about it openly in class.
And Dr. Knotts, in your experience in elementary education, do you think bullying on the basis of sexual orientation is an issue among young children?
Well, it's pervasive. I mean, we know that now, especially with the recent spate of suicides and attempted suicides that kids have had, court cases over bullying and court cases over harassment. So I think it's an absolutely prevalent issue. And I think on the most pedestrian level, you can take a second grade history standard, for instance, which teaches kids about heroes. And we say, Jackie Robinson, he's a hero for the African American community. He stood up against the bullying that he experienced. And I think in the same way you might choose to teach about Harvey Milk, standing up against the bullying that he experienced as a gay American. I just don't see that there's a difference in that. The only difference I see is the sensitivity and understanding about different kinds of communities.
And do you think this bill will have an effect on bullying? Do you think it'll help kids?
I certainly think it has the potential to affect it. I don't know, I can't give empirical evidence that it certainly will, but I certainly think it has the potential to affect. I think when we have an understanding of other, and then we have a better understanding of ourselves. And so however you identify, I might identify as an African American even though I'm not ethnically African American, right? There's kids who identify in different ways. You can look at somebody, say like Eminem, who clearly identifies in a way and has made a career in earning money in identifying outside of his race. And so I think in that regard, the more you teach about others, the more you understand yourself. And I think this has the great potential to build tolerance, build understanding, build acceptance, and certainly build at least a comfortability in talking about different persons.
All right, thank you. And I also asked Mr. Lopez about SB 48 and bullying, and here's what he had to say. Lots of people that are for this bill are saying that it will help kids that have been bullied because of their sexuality, because they've admitted being homosexual or they come out of the closet. Do you think this will help those kids? If kids know more about the issue historically, do you think these kids will be less bullied?
Well, you know, I don't buy that argument. There's a cop-out. That's a Trojan horse issue, if you will, for those that support this bill. Here's why. Not once in the text of SB 48 does it mention bullying. Not once does it address how to combat bullying. Not once does it mention how to penalize a student or a school district, a student who's committed the act of bullying, or a school district who has allowed it to happen in the school district. This isn't an anti-bullying bill. It's not. If that were the case, the supporters of this bill need to recognize their own defeat with prior bills they've had signed into law that specifically address bullying and anti-bullying on the issue of sexual orientation. You've had AB 2000 signed by now Mayor of LA, Antonio Villaraigosa, who was Speaker of the Assembly at the time. You have Sheila Kuehl, the first open lesbian in the legislature, had several bills signed into law. The most notable is AB 537. These dealt with hate crimes, bullying, harassment in the classrooms on these issues. They've been on the books for so long. Are they admitting defeat, that these laws have not actually worked and they've failed, and therefore they need to somehow include in curriculum, textbooks, and instructional materials studies on what one person brought to society, and then say, by the way, here was their sexuality and here's who they chose to sleep with? I think it's irrelevant. And at the same time, you're talking about kindergarten through 12th grade. Why should we be injecting these issues on young, impressionable minds of youth, where most parents are going to object to this stuff being taught to their kids? I say, leave this issue up to at least adults. And that could be, you know, in high school students, if they want to discuss this issue, and those that are capable of formulating their own decisions, and leave those in elementary school level, leave them out of it. There's no need for it. The last thing they're thinking about is sexual issues.
Ms. Cholo, Dr. Knotts, do either of you have a reaction to that statement?
Probably too many today, right?
In regards to the bullying issue? It's okay if you don't. Just curious.
I just disagree. I just disagree. I think that it's a de facto outcome. I don't think it's meant to be an explicit outcome. I don't think that there's something in the bill that demands talking about bullying or harassment in any way, but I think that those kinds of issues come up when you're talking about marginalized communities of all types and kinds. And so I think that it would be a natural outcropping to that bullying and harassment would lessen when you're talking about peoples who are othered and why they were marginalized and why they were bullied themselves. The Jackie Robinson example I gave just a moment ago is a perfect example of that. He was very publicly bullied, and he's really lauded as a hero, and that builds a cultural kind of understanding, a sociocultural understanding for kids that went, that's not right what they did to him, and he just wanted to play baseball. And those kinds of simple understandings are built for kids. And then, again, what Mr. Lopez was saying, that we have to do it in age and developmentally appropriate ways, and so we should leave it to the adults. But my contention as an elementary educator, I taught elementary education too for 10 years before I earned my degree in this and teach teachers how to do this themselves, is that if you develop an understanding earlier, you'll have less to unlearn later. And so I think it is an appropriate topic to discuss with kids, so that kids don't have to unlearn hatred.
And the only thing that I would add to that is that this is the right thing to do. This is the American thing to do. We are a country that is made up of Mexicans, Asians, Muslims, Christians, straight people, gay people. So it to me, and this is already a law. This was enacted. It's no longer a bill. It is a law. It's absolutely the right thing to do. And I think that our opponents would like to believe that everyone is straight and that kids, you know, would be taught to be gay. But the fact of the matter is that's not based on reality. Many kids in school, or a number of them, are gay. That's reality. And so this is the right thing to do. This is the right law. And I think there will be hell to pay if you know, there will be a strong attempt to get the law repealed. We're going to fight it. Mm-hmm. It's not going to happen. We're not going to let it happen, because look at what happened with Prop 8. These are the same people that are behind Prop 8, and we know what they're doing. They're lying, they're distorting, they're hate mongering, and we're onto them. And I think that we're going to want to keep this law in the books because it's important for kids, and it's the American thing to do. It's the right thing to do.
I want to move on to one more issue regarding SB 48 just for a minute or so. Right now there's no provision in the bill for parents who might not want their children taught this material. In other words, they can't opt their children out of learning the new material. Ms. Cholo, would you support the inclusion of an opt-out provision in the bill?
I would not. There could be, you know, parents that are white supremacists and may not want their children to learn about African American history, or may take offense at their kids learning about Martin Luther King. They don't have that. I don't think they have that option. They shouldn't have that option. This is a public school. We're talking about public education. If they so choose to opt out, they can opt out into homeschooling or private school.
And I asked Mr. Lopez this question about the opt-out as well. Let's see what he had to say. Would you be okay with this bill if it gave parents an option to have their children not taught this curriculum?
Well, no, because the opt-out provision, right now there is no opt-out provision in this bill. There's a lot of stuff that school districts on sexual issues that they've now mandated be taught in classrooms where there's no parental opt-out provision. Now, we're in favor of parental opt-out provision completely. However, if this curriculum and this content is still going to be in the classroom, most parents don't even know that they have the option of opting out. Most parents don't even know about the process to go about removing their child from the classroom. And the school districts, because they don't have any money, are not going to properly notify the parents of their right to opt out. Are they going to mail them the notices? Are they going to send it certified mail? What are they going to do? How are they going to educate parents and say, here's what we're going to be teaching. You have the right to remove your child. Do you want to do this? Most school districts won't do that. So it's another cop-out to say, well, parents can opt out of this content and these teachings if it's against their moral, religious beliefs, whatever. We would rather have it be an opt-in procedure. If they really want their students to partake in these discussions and these lessons and these speakers that are going to be coming in and viewing instructional materials probably donated from groups sympathetic to these issues, let the parents opt in. Let them look over everything first, bring in their child, then that's fine. That's up to the parent. But it's not the duty of government, nor is it the duty of the state to somehow sexualize and come up with politically correct minds of students.
Looking ahead into the future, say 5 years into the future, what do you, Ms. Cholo, want to see in schools' curriculums about gay history?
I would love it if history were more inclusive, and I would love to see lessons on Don't Ask, Don't Tell. What were the origins of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, DOMA, the Defense of Marriage Act. I'd love to have students learn about these very important pieces of LGBT history and the contributions that have been made. I think that would be the natural progression here. I think that's what we're looking at 5 years from now, that these lessons would be in place by then.
And Dr. Knotts, as someone in the field of elementary education, what do you think would be beneficial for elementary school kids, say 5 years in the future, to have in their curriculum?
I hope that there's more of an understanding and more of a comfortability, I guess, with language. I think it's very difficult now to even imagine what 5 years looks like. 5 years ago, to talk about curriculum was, or 10 years ago, let's say, let's just use the Student Safety and Violence Prevention Act. It specifically said, well, let's protect these kids, but let's not talk about them. Let's not teach about them. And I always found that a little bit ironic that we were supposed to look for issues of harassment, but not to name what those were. And that's just 10 years ago. So 5 years ago, then we said, well, remember that bill that was 5 years ago? We should implement it. So 5 years later, we finally have a law that says we should talk about curriculum. So I can't imagine what 5 years from now might look like, other than I think that I'd like to build the sense of comfort and a sense of understanding that kids could talk about all issues in the same way they talk about already African Americans, Mexican Americans, Asian Americans.
All right, well, thank you, Dr. Knotts. Thank you, Ms. Cholo. This has been a great conversation.
Thank you.
If you want to learn more about Senate Bill 48, also known as the Fair Education Act, you can find the text of the bill at www.leginfo.ca.gov.
You can reach the Courage Campaign at couragecampaign.org, and you can find the Traditional Values Coalition at traditionalvalues.org.
Tune in next week to see how social media influences political action.
You can follow On Point on Twitter at twitter.com/CSUNOnPoint, and like us on Facebook at facebook.com/CSUNOnPoint.
Thanks for watching. I'm Taelor Cage.
And I'm Mark Schuermann.
Slave times when
Confidence of the American people.
The state of Washington district attorney wanted to get rid of